So, I was prompted to make this video. It's now the middle of 2021, and over the last few months I have seen two YouTube videos where the presenter reviewed this subharmonicon, and essentially they said, and I'm paraphrasing this, this is a super interesting, great synthesizer. I've enjoyed using it. It's been a lot of fun, but I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it. Now, I thought that was a little bit weird. On the one hand, if a synthesizer is so much fun to use and interesting, why on earth would you want to get rid of it? Now, having said that, I totally understand where they were coming from. And what I'd like to do in this video is just to share a few of my thoughts about the subharmonicon. And as you will have gathered from the title of this video, I did send it back. But the reasons for that are very personal, but I'd like to share them with you and see if they resonate with you or make any sense to you. Now, I am not in any way suggesting that the subharmonicon is not a good synthesizer. Essentially, we just didn't gel, and I will have to say more about that as the video progresses. But I'd like to start at the beginning, if that's okay with you. I'm afraid this is going to be a bit of a talking heads video. I got my subharmonicon at the back end of 2020. If I knew then what I know now, I would have taken some video shots and recorded some of the sounds I made with it. But at the time, I hadn't even thought about starting a YouTube channel. So that didn't happen. However, to save you looking at me for the next 3.5 hours, no, it's not going to be that long. I will try to find some interesting shots of the subharmonicon and probably some websites that you might find interesting. So I bought my subharmonicon towards the end of 2020, and at the same time I also bought a Moog grandmother and a Moog DFAM. I was having a bit of a Moog splash out. I had never owned a Moog synth before. I like Moog, I like the company, I like the instruments it produces. I've never owned a Moog instrument, so I think I was just making up for lost time. I also like harmonics and subharmonics and polyrhythms. I shall have more to say about this in a second. And when I looked at the subharmonicon, it seemed to bring everything that I was interested in music-wise from, shall we say, the left field a little bit together. Now, before I bought it, I watched, I think, every single video on YouTube at the time about the subharmonicon. I even liked the name. If you're an H.P. Lovecraft fan, you will be familiar with the Necromonicon. I think that's it. So the subharmonicon builds on that name, I think, and suggests a sort of devilish, otherworldly approach to synthesis. Now, I got all my Moog gear from my local friendly music store. I spent the first week playing with the grandmother and the DFAM, and the second week exploring the subharmonicon. Now, the first thing that hit me, if you are familiar with synthesis, you can probably pick up just about any synthesizer, twiddle a few dials and get some sort of sound out of it. I couldn't do this with the subharmonicon. The interface is not what I would call intuitive. So I probably spent about an hour fiddling with the dials. I got bits of sound out of it. I just couldn't understand how it worked. So I resorted to the manual. Now, I am a great fan of manuals, of reading manuals. I spent the best part of my musical career reviewing and writing about music hardware and software. And you had to read the manuals to make sure that you were aware of all the features of the equipment. And even today, you really need to read instrument manuals to make sure you aren't missing everything, and so you understand how everything works. Now, the Moog manuals, I have to say, are absolutely excellent. They are well written, they are easy to read, there's lots of illustrations, there are walkthrough steps to show you how to use the equipment. The subharmonicon manual was no different. So I worked my way through the manual. I began to understand how all the parts fit together and how it worked, and I probably spent a couple of days just fiddling around, getting to understand it. The manual contains a lot of patches which you can try out for yourself, and there's a super website called something like subharmoniconpatches.com. I will leave a link to that in the description, and that has a lot of patches produced presumably by the site owner and by subharmonicon owners who send them in, so you get to see the patch, and there's an audio sample. It's a super site if you are a subharmonicon owner, or you think you might want to be a subharmonicon owner. Then check this site out and listen to the sort of sounds which the subharmonicon can produce. So at the time, they've probably got a lot more patches up there now, but at the time, at the back end of 2020, I probably programmed most of the patches on the site into the Subharmonicon. Now, one of the main reasons for getting the Subharmonicon was the hope that it would be a sort of ambient music generation machine. And it sort of is a little bit, but we have to talk about polyrhythms and polymeters at this point. Now, we've seen information on the web and even on YouTube where they really just don't quite get this right. And some of the videos are quite long and involved in explaining the difference between a polymeter and a polyrhythm. I am going to try to do this without the aid of any diagrams, and I hope you'll be able to understand it. So let's start with polymeter. If you think of a meter as a measure, we're talking about bar measures, 4, 4, 3, 4, and so on. And all a polymeter is 2 bars of different time signatures playing at the same time. So if you are a synthesist, for example, and particularly if you've used a step sequencer, you may well have created polymeters. Now let's say you have a sequencer with 2 channels, and on the first channel you create a step length of 5, so that's 5 notes in the first channel, and in the second channel you create a step length of 7. Now if you play these 2 together, you're playing a 5-bar pattern, say a 5-4 against a 7-4 pattern, and that is a polymeter. They will run out of sync with each other and line up again after 35 steps. Now, I love this sort of thing. You can create all sorts of really interesting, evolving and interwoven melodies and tunes and atmospheres and so on using this very simple polymeter process. So what's a polyrhythm? Well, a polyrhythm, if you think of rhythms as being a rhythm pattern, a polyrhythm takes just 1 bar and divides that bar into different subdivisions. Now in the West, we will typically use divisions such as 4 quarter notes, 8 eighth notes, 16 16th notes, and so on. But you can divide a bar up into other divisions. Now if you read music, you will almost certainly have come across a 1-bar triplet. That would be written in notation form as 3 half notes, 3 semi-breves with a tie over the top and a little 3 underneath. So in 1 bar of 4/4, these 3 notes would divide that bar into 3. Likewise, you could divide the bar into 5 or 7 or 9 or 11 or however many subdivisions you want. So a polyrhythm is simply the division of a bar into different subdivisions. And you will find polyrhythms are very common in some other types of music, particularly from other countries such as Africa and so on. Now the Subharmonicon is a polyrhythmic synthesizer, and the sequences section lets you divide the bar up into different subdivisions. Now this is interesting and fascinating. However, for me the problem was that virtually everything it produced sounded like a 1-bar variation. I really wanted a polymetric synthesizer rather than a polyrhythmic one. So that, I have to say, is my own fault. It is not a fault or a problem with the Subharmonicon. That's the way it is being designed to work. It's a polyrhythmic synthesizer, not a polymetric one. However, due to the confusion about the terms polyrhythmic and polymetric, I think it's easy to get confused about what it actually does. And in fact, in one of the Moog videos, the presenter does in fact mention polymeters as well as polyrhythms. Now with certain subdivisions you can get a sort of polymetric effect, but it's nowhere near as long or as complex or as intricate or as involving as using a step sequencer with different step divisions. So this was my fault, if you like, for not totally understanding how the subharmonicon worked. I think I probably did understand how it worked, but I was hoping that the sequences would somehow be longer than a bar, and it seemed to evolve for a period of time longer than they actually did. Now, I spent about a week with the subharmonicon. It was an interesting week, but I thought I was spending an undue amount of time creating sounds with it. With a synthesizer, you can twiddle a few knobs and dials. With the subharmonicon, I just didn't find it so easy. And although it's not difficult to use, it is quite involved, in my opinion. And it took a little bit of getting into. And as I say, I spent a solid week. We are talking 8-hour days here, not just a couple of hours every day or so. So I put a lot of time and effort into learning how to use it. At the end of a week, I just really wasn't getting these evolving sounds which I hoped it would produce. Now, in case this sounds like a complete disaster, it absolutely wasn't. It was a very interesting learning experience, and there were some absolutely wonderful sweet spots in amongst all these sequences and polyrhythms. But because of the sort of music which I was hoping to create, let's say that the total range of sounds that the subharmonicon could produce was, let's say it was that much, then the number of sweet spots that I was able to find was probably about that much. So to me, it just really didn't seem worthwhile. I seemed to be putting a lot of time and effort in, but not getting the results that I wanted, which perhaps isn't surprising, because again, I will say the subharmonicon was not designed to do what I hoped it would do. Now, my local friendly music shop has a 14-day return policy, so having spent the first week looking at the grandmother and the D-farm, I only had a week to play with the subharmonicon, and I would have liked to play with it for yet another week, but after a week I began to realize that I'm just not going to get the sounds out of this that I really want. I also had to take the price into consideration. Now, Moog is a premium company. It produces premium equipment, and it does tend to sell at a premium price. Now, I think I paid somewhere in the region of £760 at the back end of last year for the subharmonicon. Now, I bought a grandmother at the same time. I paid over the odds for the dog version. I mentioned this in another video, how not to buy a synthesizer. A card should pop up there, and I will leave a link in the description. But at the time, I could buy a pastel coloured grandmother for around £789. £790. So for a few pounds more, you could buy, instead of the subharmonicon, you could buy a grandmother. Personally, I thought the subharmonicon was a little bit overpriced, and I just couldn't see myself using it and getting any personal value out of it. It was not a value proposition for me to keep. It would sit on the shelf, which is no place for a synthesizer. So I returned it. Now, if you have a subharmonicon and love it and are not shouting at the screen, well, thank you for staying with me. Now, as I say, this is just my own personal take on the subharmonicon. I think it's a really interesting synthesizer, and full marks to Moog for bringing out something so different and something so innovative. And let's hope that Moog and other companies produce more gear like this. It was just that me and the subharmonicon were not a good fit for what I wanted to do. Now, should you get a subharmonicon? Should you try one? I would say yes, absolutely, because it is different. It's interesting. If you're interested in polyrhythms, if you're interested in subharmonics, look at the review videos of the subharmonicon. Yes, that was a quick change, wasn't it? This is your friendly video editor. I'm in the process of editing this video and realised that I didn't mention one thing which I really did want to mention. I will assume that you have seen other videos about the subharmonicon. If you haven't, then I would suggest, if you watch only one video, then look at the review by Tim Shoebridge. I will leave a link to that video in the description. I love Tim, I love his channel, I love his presentation. He talks a lot about synthesizers and music hardware. It's very detailed, it's very in-depth, and his is one of, I think, the very best subharmonicon reviews. So I really just wanted to say, if you wanted a hands-on review of the subharmonicon with sounds and so on, then take a look at Tim's review. Okay, thank you. Back to the movie. If you can go into a shop and try one with a knowledgeable assistant who knows how it works, and they are prepared to spend an hour or even more with you, allowing you to go through the features and see what it can do, then that would be fantastic. However, even in an hour or two, I don't think you're going to fully plumb the depths of the subharmonicon. So what I would really suggest was, if you find it interesting, buy it from a shop which has a 30-day return policy. My local friendly music shop had a 14-day return policy, which that was fine. But you need to give yourself time, you need to spend time, you need to make time to dive into it, see what it can do, and see if the two of you gel. Because I know people who absolutely love it, and that is fantastic. I thought I was going to love it, and I am probably more disappointed with myself for not loving it as much as I really wanted to love it than with the instrument itself. So that would be my suggestion. Alternatively, you could look for a second-hand subharmonicon. There are a few on the market, and then you could keep it and try it for as long as you like, and if you did want to sell it, then perhaps you wouldn't lose very much money, if any money at all. So, at the risk of opening myself up to a barrage of dissent, if you have a subharmonicon, I'm really interested to know what you think of it and what your take on the subharmonicon is and what I've said about it. And if you have a channel and have produced some subharmonicon music, then do please feel free to leave a link to that video in the comment section. I still watch every video that comes out about the subharmonicon because I'm still interested in the overall principles and ideas and theory behind it. If you had a subharmonicon and returned it, then we are in the same boat. I don't feel, because of the absolutely massive number of positive reviews of any instrument, of any synthesizer, that it is something that you absolutely have to have and have to love when you do get it. So if you found this interesting or useful in any way, then please do consider subscribing to the channel, to ringing the bell, and clicking the big thumb, because it really does help. And as always, I really do appreciate you taking your precious time to watch these videos on my channel. So for that, thank you very much indeed. I will see you in the next video.